Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, and once again we have a two-hander because with me exclusively is Commentary Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Abe's on jury duty. Christine's traveling. Matt's teaching. Just you and me, babe. So we have a weekend of hijinks, all involving the, shall we say, flighty foreign policy conduct of one Donald John Trump, who announced this weekend two major developments in the world's most important conflicts. One is, apparently he now has come to the conclusion that Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. And he's really annoyed because he went in, he's trying to make peace, and Putin doesn't want peace. And I don't get it. And then Zelensky doesn't behave well on phone calls with me. And so I'm washing my hands of the whole thing. No one asked him not to wash his hands. No one asked him to wash his hands. He's the one who said he could solve the war in a day. He's the one who's yelling and trying to get negotiations going and all of this. Why? I understand he doesn't want to be committed to the Ukrainian side, and that's a problem in and of itself. In my opinion, why he decided that he was going to be some combination of Jimmy Carter with the Camp David Accords and Jimmy Carter, who wandered around flattering tyrants and totalitarians after his presidency to get them to do things he wanted, I don't really understand, but fine. So even in a second presidency, there's a learning curve. He seems to have finally learned that Putin isn't his friend and isn't going to do what he wants just because he talks nice to him. That Putin has national interest and has undertaken this extraordinarily risky and extraordinarily costly adventure and isn't going to end it just because Trump asked him to. So that happened, of course, with the requisite insults to Zelensky, who was only the president of a country that was invaded and is fighting as best it can to prevent itself from being swallowed up by, historically one of the worst, most imperialist and least justifiable nations in the world in terms of its hunger for territorial expansion. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is Trump announcing on the tarmac or wherever he was in Bedminster, his golf club, that this Israel thing, let's get it over with. Let's get it done. Enough. Let's get the whole thing done. So you think the Israelis don't want to get the whole thing done? They'd like to get the whole thing done tomorrow.
If only somebody had thought of that. End the war.
Yeah, I mean,
what's funny about the Putin statement is that it when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, after high school, in the Jewish community, especially in the modern Orthodox community, a lot of classmates would go spend a gap year in Israel at a yeshiva.
Still do.
Yeah. Okay. So still do. They go spend a gap year, and I had a nephew doing that. Go spend a gap year in Israel. They come back and they go to college, 1 year afterwards. And the ones who get really religious, super religious, while they're there in Israel, we say they flipped out. So we had friends come back and we'd like go over the class list of who flipped out. And that's how he sounds about Vladimir Putin. Like, he's not the Putin I knew. He's flipped out. Something's clicked. A switch has been flipped. I don't know why Putin is doing this, but he seems all of a sudden crazy. He seems all of a sudden to be, not the guy that I took intro to chem with in high school. He's not the guy, that. So, I think that's kind of what it is that he's acting like he knew Putin. But the truth is that he's never really had Putin pegged, at least in the way he's talked about him in public, right? I mean, we've all sat here saying, like, the Putin that you're seeing now, is Vladimir Putin, but it's also the Vladimir Putin that we've been seeing all along. We don't know who you miss. We don't know the classmate you think flipped out. We haven't seen Vladimir Putin act any other way this
You know what?
entire
This,
time.
using like almost sitcom analogies the way you did, like the oh my god, why did that guy flip out? It's like somebody is something goes wrong in somebody's house, right? The plumbing goes wrong in somebody's house, and the owner of the house is like under the sink trying to fix the pipe which is leaking, and he's got a blowhard friend, and the friend's like, no, 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 I'll do it. You don't know what you're doing. I'll do it. Get out of there. Move out of the way. I'll do it. And then he gets under the thing and he takes the wrench and he does it. And then the pipe explodes. Like, nobody was asking America to solve and end the war in Ukraine. The whole question was, how much assistance were we going to be giving to the Ukrainians and the Europeans to give to the Ukrainians? Could we give them enough to force Russia into a reckoning in which it would say, we've had enough, we're pulling back, we're pulling out. We just spent now it's 3 fruitless years trying to take Iranian territory, knock the government over, take much of Ukrainian territory. They have for what they have lost, they have had a wildly unsuccessful war. And nobody anywhere was saying it is the responsibility, job, or goal of the United States to be the arbiter who would end this war, freeze it in place so that Putin could claim his gains and Ukraine would lick its wounds for its losses, and then the world could go on. This was Trump's own mishigas. It was his own plan, an undemanded plan. Nobody in the world except the weird people on the far right who have decided to lick the undersole of the jackboot of Putin, probably because a lot of them are getting paid to do so. Nobody was demanding this. He comes in, he creates months of confusion, conflict, giving Putin, as he is supposedly approaching a point of ceasefire, a weird green light, to start droning civilian population sites. And now he's like, well, I don't know what happened to the guy. There is no what happened. He's trying to win a war. He started a war. He started a war to take over as much of Ukraine as possible, if not all of it. The initial purpose of the war was to drive tanks to Kyiv, knock over the Zelensky government, and rule Ukraine from the capital. That was the plan. The tanks got stuck in the mud, which is one of the reasons that people in the West started thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't going to go the way Putin wants it to. So he's the guy who's like, I can fix it. It's like, do you know how plumbing works? No, it's a wrench and it's a pipe, and everybody, of course, the water doesn't want to flow and explode out. So I'm going to fix it. And there we are. Here we are after 5 months of nonsense, and he's washing his hands of it. And not only washing his hands of it, but agreeing as part of an overall European consensus that all restrictions on the offensive use of Western equipment against Russia are being lifted. There used to be mile restrictions. You couldn't use a French missile to go more than 60 miles or something like that. And now you could fire it at Kamchatka Island, between Russia and Alaska or something like that. You could, if you could do it 3,000 miles, you're able. The question is what's going to happen now with Ukraine's resupply.
See, that's an advantage for Russia also, because it's like 80% barren wasteland. It's 9 time zones wide, and 80% of it is like, it'll land in a field that
so
nobody
give it a
uses.
shot. Right, exactly. Anyway, so this misadventure in peacekeeping or peacemaking seems maybe to be at an end. I assume it's at an end. it's now right back where it was, which is that Russia is going to try to destroy Ukraine's spirit and fighting spirit until Ukraine has no choice but to concede. And the Ukrainians are going to apparently try to fight to the last man. And this is what it means to be in an intractable conflict in which one country is trying to swallow up the other country, and the other country is like, I'm sorry, we're fighting for our very survival. You're not coming in here and taking our homes and taking our lands and taking our freedom. And I know what side I'm on, and maybe you're on the other side. And if you are, you stink. You stink if you're on the other side. You're immoral. You're depraved. You're wrong. You've betrayed every fundament of what it is to be a civilized person. And I hope that when you meet your maker, you'll be able to explain to him why you thought that it would be better for Russia to prevail than not to prevail. And I just, if Trump now says there's no way to deal with Putin, you better shut up about Putin and stop saying he's got wonderful subway stations and that the Jews are somehow responsible for all of this, Tucker.
And also, you can't undo the things that you've done in the past couple months. So, he wants to wash his hands, but that's part of the Powell doctrine of breaking it and buying it is you can't undo things that I mean, honestly, it's more like the Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, who is trying to explain to people that you cannot you cannot study something in detail without affecting the way that thing behaves. So what you're studying has been changed because you're studying it, and therefore you can't really ever fully study and observe the original. It's in its original form. You can't go just flip the clock back to before Trump said and did the things he said and did about Ukraine. You can't just undo the damage that's been done. I mean, if you cut off weapons and intelligence sharing for any period of time, that period of time changes the war in a certain way. You can't undo that. It's like giving somebody a head start. If you say 3, 2, 1, go, and the guy you let the guy you're racing have a 2-step head start, you can't ever go back to having started at the same place. You will forever in the race be 2 steps behind him. So even if it was 2 days of lapsed intelligence sharing or a week, that week you can't ever make that up because you had Ukraine fighting to some extent. It's too far to say it fully, but to some extent blind, and the Russians having the field to themselves in that sense. So you can't undo that. You can't undo withholding weapons for any period of time. You can't undo the diplomatic damage it does, and you can't undo how it changes other people's behavior. How did the world respond to the way Trump was treating Zelensky? Let's say after that Oval Office incident, right? People recalibrate based on that. They have to try to anticipate where things are going. And after that Oval Office and the cutoff of intelligence sharing and all that stuff, and he's still yelling at him in his truth posts or whatever. But after all that, people had to decide where they thought America was going to go, where its priorities were, and they had to adjust accordingly. And all of that is things that you can't just erase. So you can't really wash your hands of it.
Well, you can in part because, for example, this is not a fair. I mean, this is not an appropriate analogy, except in the broadest possible sense. But in 1979, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Jimmy Carter, who was then president, who had said in 1977 that Americans needed to get over their, quote, inordinate fear of communism, and was negotiating the SALT II treaty, which was going to enshrine nuclear warhead superiority. We were already negotiating on the grounds that the Soviets could have more warheads than the United States could at the end of the process. And that was what happened in the SALT II treaty that was sent before the Senate. So that the idea being, well, Russia is part of Soviets are part of the international community, will have what we have, they'll have what we have. We want to knit them into the international community. Then they turn around and they invade and swallow up a neighboring country. Sound familiar? Of Afghanistan. And Jimmy Carter said, I've learned more about communism in the last week than I knew in my entire life. Now, what was he saying? He was saying, I was wrong. I tried to make a deal with them. Thought we could do X, but apparently we should do Y. It seems like a thoughtful comment, except that it was the president of the United States in the middle of the Cold War against the most barbaric regime the world has ever seen. And if it took the invasion of Afghanistan as opposed to the information that came out in the Gulag Archipelago 6 or 7 years to teach him that these were bad actors on the world stage, maybe the world stage needed to be reset with him kicked out back to summer stock. So Trump saying, gee, I guess Putin really doesn't want to make peace, has about it a little bit of that quality. Where have you been? Have you been following what happened? What happened in February of 2022?
And the president gets
Russia
intelligence reports that
invaded.
nobody else gets. He should know he should see every curve in the road before anybody else gets there.
Well, that's the worst part, right? Is that it's also he hired all of these people to be his military and intelligence advisors who wanted, rather than telling him the way things are, want to tell him what he wants to hear, like Tulsi Gabbard and others, and who also have pre-existing ideological commitments to Putin that we don't entirely understand and aren't telling him the order of battle. He's just using his own eyes to see, what do you mean you're droning a hospital? I thought we were going into peace talks, and now you're killing children for no reason? There isn't no reason. There's every reason. Putin is trying to terrorize and browbeat Ukraine into giving up. And that is a war strategy, and it is an understandable classical war strategy. It's called total war. There is no distinction between civilians. You're not fighting under the Geneva Conventions. You make no distinctions between the civilian populations and the military populations. And your purpose is to destroy the heart and soul and civilization of your enemy. It's Sherman's March. It's whatever you want. That is total war. And that is how Putin wants to fight this war. And he had this moment of a couple of months where he was playing footsie with Trump, because why not? Trump is really kind of on his side as he sort of understands it. And our despicable vice president yelling at Zelensky in the White House for being rude when Zelensky was saying to J.D. Vance, you're misunderstanding something, which was true, because J.D. Vance was being a demagogic, hysterical, unpleasant, two-faced lowlife, and Zelensky shouldn't have said it because it had a countervailing effect, and was bad in that regard, and it was undiplomatic of him. But it's like he couldn't believe what was coming out of Vance's mouth, and he thought they were like friends, or they were having a conversation, which was okay to be in disagreement. And then Vance said, you should be here on your knees licking Trump's feet, because that's what I do, and that's what you should be thanking him. Thanking him for what? What on earth would Zelensky have to thank Trump for? For siding with Putin, for effectively taking Putin's side in the war for his own country's survival? And then, of course, he did make deals with Trump. He made the rare earth mineral deal with Trump. He did say he wanted a ceasefire. He did everything that Trump wanted. And then finally, Trump says, all right, I get it. Doesn't want peace, but Zelensky's not nice on the phone. Well, you know what? You don't have to yell at both sides. That's fine. Congratulations. Nice of you to be so impolitic. That's who you are. Yes, Trump, you have to take Trump literally, but not seriously, or seriously, but not literally. I mean, this is one of the more shameful things an American president has done in recent memory. And that's saying a lot, because Biden did many, many, many shameful things, and Obama did many shameful things, and Trump did many shameful things in his first term. But to sort of to analogize, to say I'm washing my hands of this because Putin wants to win a war, and Zelensky, I don't like his tone. These are similar. Like, it's okay. Putin's killing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and millions of Russians, as far as we can tell. But Zelensky, Zelensky could take a better tone on the phone. Whatever. It's
But
horrible. It's
also,
horrible.
like, it's also, you should be insulted at Putin if you're so easily insulted by signs of disrespect, suggestions of disrespect or insufficient reverence. Why wouldn't he be angry at Putin from the beginning? Putin has never, it's true that Putin doesn't, argue with him on the phone or whatever, but everything that he's saying now, everything that Russia's doing is a gesture of genuine disrespect for Trump in much worse way. I mean, we don't have to compare them, but you would think it's a lot worse to not say please and thank you. It's a lot worse to bomb a hospital than to not say please and thank you in the Oval Office. Whatever it is, it's what it says about how they feel toward Trump, that Putin's actions speak much more loudly than Zelensky's do in the direction of disrespect. Zelensky is willing to be dragged by the lapels to an Oval Office meeting, and then he's willing to be dragged by the lapels out of that Oval Office meeting, cancel his speech at, I don't know, the Council on Foreign Relations, whatever it was, Hudson, whatever, wherever he was going to go next, cancel his meetings, whatever he was going to do to shore up support, get back on the plane and leave, right? He's willing to be pulled back to sign a mineral deal. Zelensky overall is basically willing to do almost anything except just raise the white flag. Putin is unwilling to do anything. And what that says is that Putin doesn't fear Trump at all. He doesn't expect consequences for his actions at all. And he doesn't really think Trump is either capable or willing to hurt him. And that should be more insulting to Trump's pride. That's Putin just kind of waltzing around like he owns the place. Zelensky doesn't do that. Zelensky is impolitic and he doesn't know how to be a diplomat. And for the love of
I think he
God,
knows. I
hire
think he
somebody
knows.
to give you better, advice. But Putin's behavior, right? Isn't that more insulting?
I think Zelensky is a pretty good diplomat. He's got most of the world on his side, except this one guy and the people that Putin bought off who have his ear. I mean, Zelensky manages Europe like a grandmaster. He's made two huge mistakes in the last year. One of which was listening wrongly to Biden people who said he should go make a campaign, essentially a campaign appearance in Pennsylvania with somebody running for office. But that was ignorance. That was the fault of his ambassador to the U.S., who was impolitic and misunderstood things. And then secondly, that's really, and then he didn't know that the only thing you do in the Oval Office is smile, and you don't have a conversation in front of the cameras with anybody of any substance. That's not what you do. And you basically give, J.D. Vance an opening, to beat you up. So that was his one cardinal mistake. In the end, it doesn't matter that much because it's not like J.D. Vance was going to change his mind because the meeting with Zelensky was good. There are bad actors in the Trump camp on this who do want Russia to win. Why they want Russia to win, I don't understand. That's why we lean heavily on they have a financial interest thing, because I don't see what possible good it serves for them or anybody for Russia to win this war. I really don't. I mean, I can't. No one can game out an explanation to me why, for any American interested in the American, sort of like the American national interest over time, would actually want Russia to win this. So you could make the argument that we should accept the Ukraine if the Ukrainians want to be cannon fodder and have Russia spend the entirety of its military arsenal trying to subdue this country that will not be subdued and end up thereby much weaker than they were before they started the war. We have a kind of horrible interest in that, right? Like a depressing, life ending, but you could say Russia will end up weaker, not stronger, because it won't have any weapons left and it doesn't have any money to make more, buy or get any more. But even that is a foolish notion, because if Russia wins, the prestige of winning and the sense that it was able to work its will in this way, in a way that no one has worked their will inside Europe, nearly in the last century or in the last 80 years, that's very bad. So
And then time is on his side to, it's not like he's going to be fighting another ground war right then. I mean, the point is that Ukraine is bleeding Russia, and and it's happening now, and Russia can't, after Israel bombed some of the Iranian ballistic missile production sites, Iran could no longer transfer ballistic missiles to Russia, which is what it was doing, and Russia was firing those missiles at Ukraine, right? So all this stuff going on now is why it's weakening Russia, because they can't just revivify some ballistic missile program now in the middle of a war. So if they win and the war's over, then time is back on their
right.
side. And that's what they're hoping for, just hoping for the West to lose interest and go away, and then just eventually they'll be able to lick their wounds, because what is it? Is somebody going to invade Russia? No, Russia's the one who invades other countries. And that's the precedent that you have to not allow to be set, that Russia can periodically pick and choose to invade countries and then sit back and lick its wounds and recover until the next time it wants to do this. But I think that one thing that really bothers me about the sort of pro-Russia-ish arguments is that we're treated as though we being Americans who support Ukraine, we are fooling the Ukrainians into being our cat's paw, and therefore we are killing them. We are responsible for the death and destruction in Ukraine, because any sane person would just want it to end. Why do you want more Ukrainians to die? Is a question that you hear a lot on social media from this corner of the right. Why do you want more Ukrainians to die? Don't you want the war to stop and Ukrainians to stop dying? Especially if you like Ukrainians so much. But everybody has to understand that if Ukrainians want to fight on, they're going to fight on. This is Ukraine's war. Nobody is telling Ukraine, you ought to keep going, don't stop. And certainly the US isn't sending that signal, certainly not now. And certainly Europe would love not to have to deal with this problem. Ukraine wants to fight. We feel we have a responsibility to help an ally, because we do.
I mean,
And that's it.
it's not just a responsibility. They're fighting. They don't have a choice but to fight. They fight or they surrender, and the level of the surrender would not just be that Russia would take the 15% more of the territory that they've sort of ended up in control of since over the course of a 3-year fight in which they've lost 1 million or more men, the Russians. Ukraine, as was the case from 1920 until 1922 or whatever, until the fall of the Berlin Wall, Ukraine will cease to exist. I mean, this is literally a fight for survival, saying it's not a war of choice for them. The war of choice is be a slave or die free. I mean, it's give me liberty or give me death. That is their choice. They don't have a choice. And this bizarre America-centric, America first, America-centric, nauseating either idiocy or deliberate don't know what you would call it, demagogy, that seems to think that everything that happens in the world happens because of American domestic political considerations and is all about us and not about them. We were presented with a binary choice when Russia invaded Ukraine: support Ukraine or don't support Ukraine. And we weren't sure where we were on this, because remember that Biden offered to fly Zelensky into exile. Now, Charles de Gaulle went into exile, when France fell to the Nazis, and then led some preposterous, for propaganda reasons, we all accepted that the West accepted that the Free French forces were a material element in the Second World War, and they were not, but that was good for propaganda purposes, that France was not surrendering, only Vichy France was surrendering. But like Zelensky's like, I can't leave. That's the end of the country. I'm the president of the country. I don't need a ride. I need weapons. Give me
Right.
weapons.
Zelensky understands that he's not being offered to be the Polish government in exile. When he's offered a ride out of Kyiv, it's an offer. It means the end of Ukraine. It's
Right.
not like a placeholder where he can gather
Yeah.
his guys and the West can
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah. And then
plan how to
they
get
could,
the
yeah.
rightful rulers of Ukraine or something. There's
Right.
no Ukraine.
Right. Right. So this was not our choice. We had nothing to do with this war, except for the fact that when we pulled out of Afghanistan, we gave Putin, in his mind, a green light, because it meant that America wasn't going to do anything to stop him. But this wasn't our choice. It's not our fight. It's not our war. It's their war. And all we need to do is to give them weapons to help prevail. And it is in our interest for them to prevail, because we need Russia to be as weak as possible, because Russia is a bad actor. How I know it's a bad actor? Because it invaded Ukraine, and it invaded Georgia before that, and it'll invade somewhere else later if it can, and it's bad. And so we need it to be in a box, or at least controlled. And this argument that it is otherwise is about us. It's all about domestic politics. It's all about the fact that Alexander Vindman was the whistleblower who got Trump indicted the first time in 2019. I mean, that is that's the original sin that a decorated military officer working on the National Security Council joke is he's of Ukrainian origin, so he, would be for Ukraine. Just to put a bow on this, and now I'm going far afield, Sasha Vindman is a Jew. Ukrainian Jews are not patriotic Ukrainians bringing their love of Ukraine with them to the United States, like, an Irish person who leaves County Cork and then sings, Danny Boy and weeps, on St. Patrick's Day. Jews have a horrible history in Ukraine. Jews got out of Ukraine the way they got out of Russia, because Ukraine is inhospitable territory, even though, remarkably enough, Zelensky is Jewish and has ended up the president of Ukraine. In order to prove his independence as a president of Ukraine, as a Jew, he's, of course, had to be anti-Israel to make sure that people don't think that he's some kind of an Israeli agent. But
he also can't. That's the one reason he also can't stop fighting, right? He can't. The Jewish president of Ukraine can't be the guy to say, yes, I'll flee Kyiv, and say, it's okay that Ukraine won't exist as a state anymore. He's in a position where, from this Jewish religious ethnic perspective, nationalist perspective, he's trapped. He cannot do some of the things that people are yelling at him to do. He can't.
Right. Anyway, I'm just saying that this whole thing, as I say, to put a bow on it, is all about how there was this line of thought on the right that there was somehow a Ukrainian operation led by Ukrainian staffer Sasha Vindman, who I am not a fan of, and I'm not an admirer of, and I think he's a self-righteous preening dupe, and that he was looking for a way to use his position to take Trump out, and I find him despicable. But he wasn't doing this as a Ukrainian op, is what I'm saying. Ukrainian Jews are not supporters of Ukrainian nationalism. Is just to make this clear. Ukrainian nationalism was a net horrible negative for the Jewish people over the course of the late 19th and much of the 20th century. And Ukrainians participated in pogroms, and Ukrainian Jews hid, and they did not study their religion and all of that. So just to put a bow on the whole thing. Anyway, let's move on to Israel, by the way, because that was the second weird event, or a lot of different things going on between Trump, Netanyahu, Israel, the hostages, Hamas, and everything. So just to separate them out. Number one, there was a little talk that there was reason to be optimistic about a hostage deal. And even Bibi said to the hostage families, he had some hope that there was movement, which when it turned out there wasn't movement, the hostage families who hate him, or a lot of them hate him, said, like, he gave us false hope. So it's like, okay, gee, like, I'm sure that's really what he wanted to do, was have to go back to you and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong about this. It appears that the mediator in this, the person who has been the mediator in this conversation, someone named Baba, is now way out over his skis and making claims that he has no right or grounds to claim on advancing the possibility of a deal between Hamas and Israel. The Hamas leadership fighting the war in Gaza, whatever that is, whatever remnant of the leadership still lives, has now openly dissociated itself from the people who are living in the Four Seasons Hotel in Doha, who are Hamas in Qatar. That's apparently who Baba has been representing in these talks. And Steve Witkoff, the negotiator, yesterday or late last night or something, said there are no hostage talks. It's over. We've got nothing to talk about. We don't even know if the people we're talking to have any ability to negotiate for Hamas anymore. Meanwhile, Trump and Witkoff and whatever are trying to make a deal with Iran on the nukes, and apparently Trump and Bibi had a phone call on Thursday to talk about the American negotiation with Iran over the nukes. And we're getting a lot of different leaks about what happened in the phone call. And I have no idea what to trust, except the only thing that we can be sure of is that Bibi is saying to Trump, don't believe it. Don't believe it. Don't believe them. They're, just stay firm on the no enrichment and everything, but don't believe them. And maybe Trump got mad at him or didn't get mad at him or said, I'm doing this for you. And it's possible that Trump said, look, and we heard this, Amit Segal, the very fine television commentator and columnist, says this morning in his newsletter, or yesterday in his newsletter, that Israel is preparing two different possible strikes on Iran. One if the deal fails, and the other if the deal succeeds. That Bibi is already sort of sending signals that Israel, if it can come up with a window in the capability, if the deal with the United States goes through and it features the survival of the Iranian nuclear program, Israel will hit Iran regardless of whether Trump says we have a deal, which of course is unbelievably risky. America is now Israel's only friend in the world. Not that it had very good friendships with Britain, France, and Canada, like with friends like that, who needs enemies a lot of the time. But I mean that, they
it's
got,
like Trump and Putin. Where was the Macron that we knew and loved? He flipped out.
yeah,
Where's the
maybe
France that loved us?
Maybe this is why his wife slapped him in the face on the tarmac. the single most interesting incident of the last 6 months is this image of Macron standing there on the plane, and suddenly out of the left hand part of the image comes his wife's hand pushing him in the face, and him looking as though the most embarrassing and humiliating thing that ever happened to him or to anybody on earth. So it's a
Well, the
great
first thing
moment.
he does, by the way, is look to the side at the cameras because a politician always knows where they are. He knows that he's in the view of the cameras and she's not. He immediately he's thinking like, what does this look like? He goes into politician mode and then he gives a kind of goofy smile, which was kind of funny, almost endearing. I mean, I think that's probably the only way to play it off is that it was like this sort of endearing moment. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
yeah, it was so endearing. It was
for
about
him.
it, yeah, it was about as endearing as the movie The War of the Roses. Like that's how endearing it was. You know, that it was really not endearing. Anyway, I don't know where we're going, but so Bibi is telling Trump, "Don't make a deal." Someone's leaking to Amit Segal that Israel is prepared to strike Iran if the deal is bad. Israel is preparing to strike Iran if the deal isn't made. Trump is saying, "I've had enough of the war." I said on the tarmac, this should wrap up very quickly. And meanwhile, Israel seems to be wrapping things up fairly quickly in Gaza. It's killing most of the leadership. It seems to have complete operational control of Rafah, which was the headquarters of Hamas. I don't quite know what this means. We don't even know what it will mean when the war is over, in the sense that I guess what it'll mean is that the people of Gaza will say they're all dead, so we can come out and take your food now. So where are you on this, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think just to go back one sec to the Iran stuff, I think one of the interesting things is that in the newsletter that you mentioned, in Amit Segal's newsletter, he connects it directly to the truce, the so-called truce with or ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen, and he says, "Look, this morning, two ballistic missiles or whatever were fired at Israel by the Houthis from Yemen." So when Israel looks at this and says, "Okay, Trump struck a deal with the Iranian conglomerate," if you want to put it that way, which the Houthis very much are part of, that deal did not include, like, it didn't make us any safer. We're still getting the missiles, so we still have to deal with the fact that they shoot missiles. So I think it's in that context that Trump is not going to, that there's no guarantee that he's going to sign a good deal or a deal that considers anything at all necessarily from Israel's perspective, which is the important part. The other thing is that I think that people are. This was in the CNN piece that said Israel's. We had leakers in the White House saying Israel's preparing for a strike on Iran and it could complicate Bibi's relationship with Trump, blah, blah, blah. But part of that is really just the obvious thing of course, there are plans, and of course, those plans are constantly being redrawn and revised based on conditions on the ground. Who could possibly think otherwise, right? Like, there's no way that Israel doesn't have some plans in case it believes it needs to strike Iran, right? Those plans don't mean it's going to strike Iran. People should get a glimpse of the plans that American military planners have. We have a plan for a war with China. It doesn't mean tomorrow we're going to war with China. But you better believe that we have plans for various strikes and in all sorts of contingency plans. This is why we do war games and all these sorts of joint runs with allies and things like that. Everybody is constantly planning for what they need to do. So I think there's also a sense of people just really enjoying the ability to make trouble for Bibi with Trump, whereas some people in the administration are clearly easily convinced that an Israeli preparation for a strike means, oh, they're going to do it tomorrow, and now you're going to have another war on your hands, President Trump, and the Israelis, they've defied you, and all this other stuff. And I think it's a combination of cynicism and to some degree ignorance of people reading these reports and not really understanding how normal all of this is. But at the very least, they're expecting the public not to know how normal it is,
Right.
right? They tell the public there's this plan, and they know that a certain percentage of the public is going to interpret it as, I guess, an attack is imminent. And so that's the stuff with Iran, is that they're sort of on two different tracks. With the hostages, I think that one problem you have is, even when he was alive, and we think, I think the consensus is that Mohammed Sinwar is not alive
That is the
anymore.
brother of
As a
Yahya Sinwar,
the
who
brother
was
of
the
Yahya Sinwar,
mastermind of October 7th and the operational
right,
commander of Hamas in Gaza.
right, and his other brother, Zakaria. This is like I
They're
don't
like
want
the
to make the
Emmanuel,
association.
terrible thing to say. They're like the
I,
Emmanuel brothers, except they're not. Emmanuel brothers are Zionists
right.
and all this, but like one was head of Hamas, one was his deputy, the other was like the head of the Islamic University in Gaza. It's a very eminent family.
Right. I just remember this. There's this show where somebody loses a part to a Hemsworth that nobody knew existed.
Right. Yeah.
There's a
Right.
fourth Hemsworth.
Yeah.
That's how I felt when Zakaria Sinwar turned up. There's
Yeah.
another Sinwar.
Yeah.
How many Hemsworths, Sinwars?
Yeah.
But so that we believe that Mohammed Sinwar has been eliminated. Even before he was, there was a lot of talk about how he was in over his head anyway. I mean, he had taken over a rump.
Yeah. It's like
Hamas is a
Fredo. It's
rump.
like if Fredo
Yeah.
took over the Corleone family.
Yeah, at a moment, at a low tide moment. Also, I mean, at a rut, he doesn't have the A team anymore either. So it's all scrubs, right? And so we heard murmurings all the time that one thing that made the hostage negotiations difficult is that Muhammad was like, holed up somewhere in a spider hole like he was Saddam Hussein, because he didn't have anybody to trust. He doesn't know who to trust. And even within his own organization, and it was hard to get. And then we had reports that Hamas in Gaza don't know exactly what this means, but has broken from its political bureau abroad.
Right.
This is the latest thing. Now, the political bureau abroad is who we generally talk to, we being the United States, and obviously Qatar, who is hosting them, right, through intermediaries. But the political bureau are the ones you talk to, because it's not like you can just get a Sinwar on the phone for obvious reasons. And so whatever that means exactly, that they've broken from them, what it means first and foremost is that the communication lines have been disrupted in a major way. Maybe not completely severed. I don't know that they're not talking at all, but the Hamas that negotiators talk to about these deals are not the ones sitting right now in Gaza.
Right, which is why Witkoff said yesterday the talks are over. Because somehow it became clear to him that whoever he was talking to was in no position to effectuate a deal, and that you were only getting America or Israel to agree to concessions on things, but that you had no realistic assurance that a single hostage would be moved, because they may not even have, as you say, they may not even have communications any longer. I mean, if you have seen the condition of Rafah from above, you would understand that we're in like 486 BC territory here, in which the only real way for somebody to get a message from one place to another would be for them to run. Like the marathon, the news of the Battle of Marathon, which is where the marathon comes from. The guy who ran 26 miles delivered the message that the Greeks would, and then dropped dead. That's and of course you can't run from Rafah to Doha. There's no
Right.
footpath.
And that's what Sinwar was doing. He was using runners. Yahya Sinwar,
Yeah.
the first Sinwar brother, he was using runners, and he's gone too. So they might not even be trusting runners.
Right.
He might literally be just surrounded by limestone underground.
Yeah.
We don't know, talking to himself.
Or I mean, this is how successful psychological warfare works. They don't know who, if anyone that they're talking to has or has not been turned, right? They don't know, is the guy who was sitting next to me, is he an Israeli agent or not? And so who knows what's going on down there? Who knows what's going on in the deepest tunnels? Are they shooting each other in the head? Are they looking at each other, and it's the end of Macbeth. Macbeth basically has to have all the other Thanes killed because he can't trust, he knows if it were he would be turning on himself. So therefore he has to kill all of them because they're like him and he would be them, and so he would have somebody like him killed. Like that's what happens when things degrade. And so the only real question now, it's not that Hamas can live to fight another day, really. I mean, some version of a resistance movement or whatever could be in power in Hamas if Israel gives up the ghost too soon. It really is there a modality by which to get the hostages back? And the despairing part of this is that if all communications have broken down, there really isn't, because who's going to take the hostages back?
And it's a game of telephone,
yeah,
right?
which is
So
also
Steve
why.
Witkoff hears something, says to Bibi Netanyahu, "We're making some progress." Bibi reports to the public or the hostage families, "We're making some progress." But it was that the "we're making some progress" wasn't whispered directly into Bibi's ear. It was whispered into Steve Witkoff's ear, and Witkoff then whispered the message that he got to Bibi. And so
Right. And then the next day, Witkoff said that message was an error. And as I say, I think the story here is that the suddenly famous mediator, Mr. Baba, is got his own agenda and has been bullshitting Witkoff and Bibi, and Bibi doesn't know what to. He wanted to deliver a piece of good news to the hostage families who are just, for all sorts of for every understandable reason, are veering between despair and rage and impotence and a desire to lash out and all of that. And this was one moment at which he could say to them, "There's a ray of light," and then it turned out there is no ray of light, and so now they're mad at him for giving them false hope. So,
and we should say, they're obviously, Bibi Netanyahu would only ever want to genuinely deliver good news if he's promised, right? If he promises good news, it's not because he's playing game. It's not because he's trying to play psychological games with the Israeli
yeah,
public. It's because he thinks there's a shot at good news. Otherwise, he wouldn't say. He's more of a pessimist and a cynic in that regard. He's not somebody who runs around saying we're always on the verge of getting everybody back or whatever, something like that. So it's
yeah,
it's he had some reason to believe that Witkoff had some reason to believe, and I
right.
think that has kind of shattered everybody's illusions now of how much they can even know.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there, and hopefully have a more populated podcast for you tomorrow. This is two in a row with just the two of us. Matt and I did one yesterday in which we talked exclusively about the TV show Andor, and here we're talking about these two wars, and maybe tomorrow we'll talk some domestic politics. But until then, thank you, Seth. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.